Present-day Hampton, Virginia, the site of the annual Blackbeard Pirate Festival, whose crowds each year are testament to our continued fascination with the bold, swashbuckling picaroons who once terrorized the high seas. Tourists mingle with pirate reenactors in period dress in hopes of getting a bit of the flavor of the golden age of piracy. Adults are captivated, and so are children.
That's 6 more than Mickey Rooney, I'll have you know.
Yeah, but you didn't star in Night in a Museum.
I don't like you. One day, Blackbeard...
300 years ago, Hampton was a key Chesapeake port serving a vast tobacco fleet and harboring a large number of sailors who sometimes became pirates.
The lot of a sailor was rough, and with a captain who could have been dictatorial with conditions that were as close to the edge as possible, it's little wonder that many sailors would take the opportunity to go pirating.
The opportunity to become a pirate usually occurred at sea.
If a pirate ship captured a merchant ship, the crew of the merchant ship would be given an opportunity to join the pirate crew. And in many cases, they would choose to do that because it meant less work and higher rewards.
While many sailors were forced by their captors to join the Brotherhood, many more took little persuading.
Yeah, I could sail on this merchant vessel with a captain who could beat me, and it's within his rights to do so. He can underfeed me and work me to death. Or I can jump on board with the pirates, and this pirate captain, who I know his reputation is fantastic. And again, I may have a short life, but I am going to have a good life.
Shortly after the founding of the American colonies, the Chesapeake Bay attracted pirates who found its countless coves and tributaries provided good places to hide and repair their ships after a winter of plundering in the Caribbean. Ships from Maryland, Virginia, and Pennsylvania, loaded with goods and mostly unprotected, often provided easy prey for the pirates of Chesapeake Bay. Pirates have always fascinated us. From Disney's Captain Hook to Johnny Depp's Jack Sparrow, pirate tales have captured the popular imagination. And while you may know all about Pirates of the Caribbean, it might surprise you to learn those very same pirates spent time here in Chesapeake Bay. The peaceful waters of Chesapeake Bay provide a place to work and play today. But 300 years ago, the Chesapeake echoed with cannon fire as pirate ships waged fierce battles with ships of the Royal Navy and attacked lightly defended merchantmen. Colonial governors in Virginia and Maryland waged all-out war against the picaroons who preyed on merchant ships bound for England. The first recorded act of piracy in the Chesapeake occurred in 1635, but it was hardly typical of the type of plundering that would come later. It stemmed not from a quest for treasure, but over a land dispute between Maryland and Virginia, the first of many such land disputes that would follow. William Claiborne was a most unlikely pirate. Politically connected, he was prominent in the Virginia colony and a member of the Governor's Council. When he was granted permission by Virginia's governor to explore and settle land in the northern Chesapeake, he laid claim to Kent Island, where he quickly established a trading post. But there was a problem. Not long after Claiborne began to settle Kent Island, Lord Baltimore received a charter from the king to establish a Catholic colony in the New World, and chose the region just north of Virginia. It was quickly determined that Claiborne's Kent Island enterprise now fell squarely within Maryland's borders. While Claiborne insisted his land was part of Virginia, Maryland was just as convinced that Kent Island fell within its jurisdiction, and as such should be taxed. When Claiborne refused to pay, Lord Baltimore ordered Claiborne jailed and his property seized. In the spring of 1635, things got out of hand. When a small Maryland ship loaded with supplies sailed south toward Kent Island, Claiborne's men seized the ship and took its crew prisoner. Maryland retaliated by taking one of Claiborne's ships. On April 23rd, about 2 weeks later, it all culminated in a naval battle in the Pocomoke River between the Kent Islanders and the Marylanders, in which 3 men were killed and several wounded. Political skirmishing followed actual skirmishing, but in the end, Kent Island submitted to Maryland rule. The Maryland Assembly charged Claiborne, once an upstanding citizen of Virginia, with the crimes of piracy and murder, and seized all his land on Kent Island. The next act of Chesapeake piracy occurred as a direct result of a political crisis in England. King Charles, who was far more lenient toward Catholics than previous English monarchs, faced civil war with Parliament, which was controlled by Protestants. England was forced to choose sides, and so in fact were the American colonies. Under pressure at home, King Charles ordered the colonies to be on the lookout for agents of Parliament, to seize their ships and to hold their masters on charges of treason. In the winter of 1644, Captain Richard Ingle sailed his ship, Reformation, into the St. Mary's River and squarely into this conflict. Unknown to Ingle, a man had gone to court in St. Mary's, filing papers accusing him of treason, claiming that he had heard him make treasonous comments about the king. Arrested but granted bail, Ingle and his crew boarded their guarded ship and managed to escape. In doing so, Ingle made the Maryland authorities look foolish, but he wasn't finished yet. If Ingle had not been an enemy of the crown before, he was now. Returning to the Chesapeake from England in the winter of 1644, Ingle had a plan for revenge on the Marylanders at St. Mary's. He was on a mission, he told his men, to plunder the Papist. By now, Maryland Governor Calvert was willing to forget the unpleasant past and forgive Ingle's transgressions, but the Protestant captain wasn't having any of it. In early 1645, he sailed into St. Mary's Harbor, capturing the fort and attacking the settlement. Ingle then set his sights on a large manor house, taking it and several small craft at anchor there. After plundering the house of all its contents, Ingle's men burned it to the ground. For months, Richard Ingle and his growing fleet waged war against the Catholic colony until he grew tired of the sport or satisfied his considerable revenge and departed the Chesapeake and presumably his buccaneer ways. The colonies surrounding Chesapeake Bay, primarily Maryland and Virginia, used the bay as a main source of transportation, moving goods to other colonies and to England. The bay's waters are shallow, with numerous shoals, calling for small, swift boats instead of large ships.
The workhorse of the day was called a sloop, but for the most part, it's small, 100 tons or less. It's got a single mast. It's a broad boat. It's designed to carry a lot of cargo, but it was also designed to be quick and run by as few men as possible so that it was a profitable sort of vessel. You also start to see the development of the schooner, which is related to the sloop. The idea being there, they've added another mast and they've made the lines finer. It's a much skinnier ship, so it can go quicker. And then the larger vessels that would be hauling cargo is called a brigantine. And that's almost a full-blown sort of ship that one gets when you think of a sailing ship. And again, bigger, more cargo, designed to go pretty darn quick.
Soon the colony's thriving tobacco trade attracted the attention of Dutch privateers. Now, a privateer is a ship captain with authority from one government to attack ships from another country. It's government-sanctioned piracy, if you will. Piracy as a tool of war. When England and the Netherlands went to war in the 1660s, the colonies braced for the expected invasion of the Chesapeake by Dutch privateers who would seize ships full of tobacco. One of the most colorful of these privateers was Admiral Abraham Crimson, or as the English called him, Crimson. Perhaps Crimson's greatest exploit occurred at the mouth of the James River in June of 1667. After capturing two smaller ships along the Virginia Capes, Crimson learned a British tobacco fleet was making ready to sail to England. Flying the British Union Jack, Crimson's ship sailed up the James and captured the single British guard ship, allowing it then to pounce on the entire fleet, capturing it along with its valuable cargo of tobacco. For the next few years, Dutch privateers caused havoc in the bay, interrupting the tobacco trade to England. Despite Virginia's best efforts to mount a defense, there was never enough force available to stop them. By the 1680s, privateers weren't the only problem. Sir William Berkeley, Royal Governor of Virginia, noted the bay was so full of pirates that it is impossible for any ships to go home safely. Pirates were indeed a problem. Buccaneers, some homegrown, others from far-off lands, began to rob and pillage both ships and waterfront plantations. Maryland joined with Virginia to devote more resources to apprehending freebooters, and when 5 pirates were captured after raids on Chesapeake plantations, it set up one very odd set of circumstances, recounted in Donald Chaumet's authoritative book, Pirates on the Chesapeake. The 5 men were returned to Virginia and locked up in the Middlesex County Jail to await trial. They easily escaped, and after an extensive search, 2 of the men, William Harrison and John Manley, were brought back, tried for piracy, and sentenced to hang. On the evening of December 8th, Harrison and Manley broke out of the Middlesex County Jail and escaped into the night. Incredibly, 3 nights later, they returned to the jail, climbed back into their cell, and sent for the sheriff, telling him they were ready to meet their fate. Harrison and Manley explained their strange actions this way. They had unfinished business to attend to, and now having completed it, they were ready to be executed. When word spread about the honest pirates, leading citizens demanded that they be spared. A reprieve was granted on the condition the men swear not to return to piracy. And just what was the unfinished business they felt they must complete before meeting their maker? It remains a mystery, for the 2 pirates never revealed it. By the late 1600s, pirates in greater numbers were spending their summers in the Chesapeake. They mixed easily with other sailors in the seaport villages on the eastern and western shores of the bay, where sailors had come to be a dominant influence, set apart by their unique characteristics and lifestyles.
They had their own language, they had their own way of dress, their own mode of walking even. So they were kind of an exceptional people who stood out, particularly when they were on land.
Sailors also stood out from others in the community in another way. They were likely to bear the scars of their very dangerous profession.
If you think about the sailing ships of the period, you'd be crawling up and down the rigging, you'd be going in and out of the hold or certain parts of the hold. There could be cargo shifting around. There were lots of moving parts, booms, lines, pulleys that would be flying around a ship. The image that you get of a sailor or even a pirate missing a hand, missing an eye, missing a leg, that's a real image.
Pirates normally spent their winters in the warm waters of the Caribbean, plundering Spanish treasure. When April rolled around, they sailed north and attacked shipping off the Virginia Capes. They would often seek shelter in the bay's many rivers and snug coves, hiding out and making repairs to their ships. They attacked colonial merchant ships in the bay, not always for their cargoes, but often for their rigging. For pirates, lines and sails were hard to come by, and could best be acquired by taking them from their victims. The pirate ships that prowled the waters of the Chesapeake were indistinguishable from the other merchant vessels. That's because at one time they were merchant vessels, carrying all manner of cargo. The bay's smaller, faster ships were prime targets.
Actually, these are the type of ships pirates preferred, in particular the sloops. There's a variation of the sloop called the Bermuda sloop, and this was a particularly well-designed vessel. A very large mast, a very small hull. That meant there was a very large sail and that it could move very, very quickly. But because it was kind of a small vessel, it could hide in rivers and creeks and inlets where a larger warship chasing it couldn't find it. The idea being the pirates would take this sloop and convert it to their needs. If there was any unnecessary decoration or unnecessary subdivisions of the ship because it was a cargo vessel, they'd cut those things out and modify the vessel by putting as many guns as they could fit on it there, and then providing accommodations for as many sailors, as many pirates as possible. The idea being that you can overwhelm any ship that you could catch, but you could run away from any ship that actually could overwhelm you.
Inferior ships were sunk or, in some cases, returned to their masters, but really fine ships were put into pirate service. Spacious and comfortable ships were a plus, but in most cases the pirates prized speed and maneuverability. Pirating could be highly profitable as well as dangerous, and while most pirates died on deck or at the end of a rope, a very few were able to retire with their booty to live out their lives in comfort and leisure, but it was an unusual situation in the 17th century. In 1687, King James issued a new proclamation against piracy, and as part of it, extended an offer of clemency to buccaneers who turned themselves in. The following year, the Royal Navy boarded a tiny boat in the Chesapeake and found 3 men with 3 large chests filled with pieces of 8 and silver plate. Concluding the men were pirates, the naval officers arrested them and hauled them off to Jamestown. The men were Edward Davis, Lionel Delawafer, and Peter Henson. Though they proclaimed their innocence, it turned out the men had indeed spent a lot of time in the Caribbean. The story of how they came by their treasure was a bit fuzzy, to say the least. So one of the most bizarre and prolonged legal standoffs in colonial history began. Davis, Delawafer, and Henson hired an able lawyer who did his best to argue for his client's freedom under the King's clemency program. It was a little tricky since Davis, Delawafer, and Henson still maintained they weren't pirates. Finally, the men were released from jail, but the royal colony maneuvered to confiscate the treasure valued at more than 10,000 pounds. Davis, Delawafer, and Henson filed appeal after appeal, pleading for the return of their property. The case dragged on for years before finally reaching King William himself. After reviewing the facts, the king ruled the treasure did rightfully belong to Davis, Delawafer, and Henson. However, the crown should receive a share, he ruled, ordering that 1/4 of the treasure be used for the erection of a free school in the colony of Virginia. And so it was that in 1693, the College of William and Mary was founded in Williamsburg, Virginia, in part with pirates' booty. By 1700, officials in Virginia were in a full-scale war against pirates. While the governors of some other colonies tolerated pirates and looked the other way as they sold their booty to merchants on the black market, Virginia governors regarded pirates as a menace to society and certainly a menace to commerce.
Well, there was a big fear because of the size of that bay out there and the size of the 2 colonies that touched that bay, Maryland and Virginia. The governments couldn't be everywhere. And there was a tremendous fear that the Eastern Shore was going to become a pirate, hangout. To some extent, it was.
But it seemed to be even more than just fear. Among the colony's upper crust, like Virginia's Governor Francis Nicholson, there was also loathing.
I confess that I have always abhorred such sort of profligate men and their barbarous actions, for they are a disgrace to mankind in general, and the noble, valiant, generous English in particular, who have the happiness of being governed by so great a king. Francis Nicholson, 1695.
To Nicholson, who represented the establishment at the turn of the 18th century, pirates were men who refused to play by the rules and who operated very much outside the system. Their democratic values must also have been alarming to a ruling class accustomed to a system where everyone knew and stayed in their place. If proper society hated pirates, the feeling was mutual. The argument can be made that many pirates of this era were motivated nearly as much by their disdain of the establishment and all it represented as they were by the lure of ill-gotten wealth.
Because from what we found out in our research, the pirates were just anti-establishment, anti-government.
The pirates just didn't fit into establishment society, and they really didn't want to fit in. They lived for the moment and followed their own rules. And from that standpoint, they were, in a way, the very first counterculture, predating the 1960s Woodstock generation by nearly 300 years.
In a lot of ways, the crazy way they dressed, we always associate them with the big hats and the fancy shirts and jewelry and all that, was to simply make fun of the societal rules. There were rules about, what kind of shirts you could wear, how big your hat could be, how long your waistcoat could be, was all established by your lot in life, your social position. So, the pirates just mocked that by wearing whatever they wanted to.
The crews of pirate ships were democratic institutions that were years ahead of their time.
Those who served, honest sailors who served in the world's royal navies, were under strict discipline. And in the various nations of the world, there was a system of deference where people looked up to their betters. It was strictly adhered to. But aboard the pirate ship, this did not happen.
On a pirate ship, the majority ruled, with the crew often overriding the wishes of the captain, who, by the way, was elected by the crew. New pirates signed articles, which amounted to a contract.
There were a list of things that were expected of you, and this is what you would receive in return, both good and bad. Bartholomew Roberts, for example, forbid drinking after a certain hour. He wanted the lights out at a certain hour. He had mass on deck every Sunday. He was a teetotaler, but he didn't enforce that rule on his crew. That was just his decision. It also would say in there that every man will get one share, perhaps, with the captain getting 2, maybe the gunner getting 2. Rewards for if you spotted the ship that they ended up capturing, you might get an extra share for that. If you were the first of the pirate crew to board your opponent's ship, you may get an extra share for that.
The articles and the democratic values they enforced were truly revolutionary for the time. But perhaps even more revolutionary was the Pirate Disability Plan.
For example, if you were on a merchant ship, you lost the use of your right arm, and you'd be put ashore and you'd be a beggar the rest of your life. But on a pirate ship, if you lost your left arm, and this would be in the articles, the exact amount. If you lost your left arm, you may get 400 pieces of gold. If you lost your right arm, you'd be 800. So, they looked after their own.
The world of pirates was indeed very different from British and colonial society. And long before the seeds of democracy would sprout in the British colonies, it flourished to a great extent aboard pirate vessels. And though it was far from a colorblind world, minorities usually found they had much more freedom on a pirate ship than in colonial society.
If they came across an individual of a different race who was useful to the crew, or if they came across a freedman or an escaped slave, odds are they weren't going to treat them differently simply because of the color of their skin.
Some pirate captains, including Blackbeard, had a large number of black crew members who shared equally in the work and the treasure. While pirates treated one another equally, the law didn't always treat pirates the same. When white pirates were captured, they were usually hanged. Black pirates were generally sold into slavery. The revolutionary equality aboard pirate ships might help explain the contempt pirates often displayed to gentlemen who they occasionally captured. Pirate Captain Samuel Bellamy of the Widow Galley is said to have exploded in rage at the master of one of the ships taken off the coast of Virginia in 1717. His rant perfectly captures the contempt these rebels felt for the establishment.
You are a sneaking puppy, and so are all those who will submit to be governed by laws, which rich men have made for their own security. They vilify us, the scoundrels do, when there is only this difference. They rob the poor under the cover of law, forsooth, and we plunder the rich under the protection of our own courage. Samuel Bellamy, 1717.
The Royal Navy usually kept a guard ship near the mouth of the Chesapeake to protect the colonies against pirates. Unfortunately, these ships were not always an effective deterrent.
For the North American station, unfortunately, a lot of the guard ships they were sending over were older vessels. Therefore, they were kind of tired. They weren't going to be as fast as they were when they were newly constructed.
Even when they were in good condition and fully staffed, these guard ships did not always seek out battles with pirates, even though their job was to protect the colonies.
The British had one guard ship here And they basically, they kept an eye on where the pirates were, and then they arranged to be somewhere else because they didn't necessarily, want to put their lives at risk.
On those rare occasions when a guard ship challenged a pirate ship, the fighting was particularly vicious and bloody.
Pirate battles were vicious because there was no place to go. You were aboard ship. You were aboard those wooden decks. There was nowhere to go except into the water. So men fought for their lives. And of course, pirates, when they were captured, they were hanged. So they had no other choice but to fight to the death.
One of the bloodiest and most ferocious pirate battles to take place on the Chesapeake occurred in April 1700 in Lynnhaven Bay, in what is now Virginia Beach. A French pirate named Guittard had assembled a small fleet of ships captured just off the shore of Virginia and was anchored in the bay with 50 prisoners aboard his flagship, La Paix. Learning of the pirates' presence, Governor Nicholson, who was in Elizabeth City County, ordered the British man-o'-war HMS Shoreham, under command of Captain William Passenger, to sail to Lynnhaven to engage the pirates.
The governor, Francis Nicholson, boarded the guard ship and was accompanied by militia and also the customs collector, Peter Hayman, ventured out of Hampton and towards Lynnhaven Inlet.
Shortly after sunrise, Shoreham bore down on the pirate ship and fired a shot across her bow.
There was a pitched battle, a fierce fight. The outcome was bloody. Guittard surrendered after losing many of his men and was taken aboard the guard ship and brought back to Hampton and eventually sent to England, where he was hanged.
There were fewer casualties aboard Shoreham, but among them was Peter Hayman, the young customs officer killed by a pistol shot. Devastated by the loss of his friend, Governor Nicholson had Hayman buried at what was then St. John's Church and provided an elaborate tombstone that told the story of his death.
And to this day, the stone rests above his remains. And the stone is intriguing, as it says, "Killed by pirates who greatly infested these waters."
After the defeat of Guittard, things were relatively quiet in the Chesapeake. Virginia was well protected by 2 British warships, Lime and Pearl. Also, the king granted amnesty to pirates who would swear to become law-abiding citizens. A growing number of pirates, wealthy from their days of plundering, decided to cash in their chips and settle down to spend their booty. But the fear of piracy remained, in part because of one man, Captain Edward Teach, also known as Edward Thatch, but known to all as the notorious Blackbeard.
A lot of mystery surrounds him. No one's really quite sure of his origin or even his name. But Blackbeard had sanctuary in North Carolina. The governor of North Carolina was in cahoots with the notorious pirate and protected him to some extent.
Blackbeard was, in fact, a larger-than-life character, so much so that today it's hard to separate fact from fiction. For example, legend has it that he once shot a crew member in the kneecap just to make other crew members more afraid of him. He was a large, imposing figure, and he used fear as a weapon, and it was very effective. After amassing a fortune from plunder in the Caribbean, Blackbeard also decided to take advantage of the king's amnesty offer. However, he apparently had no intention of giving up piracy. By 1718, Blackbeard was becoming a law unto himself, and the fear that gripped the Carolinas began to spread into Virginia. At the same time, the king's pirate amnesty program had an unintended consequence. Soon taverns were filled with ex-pirates who had little to do. Colonial authorities soon began to fear what might happen if they got bored and decided to resume their roving ways. Perhaps it was that fear that made Virginia Governor Alexander Spotswood receptive to the pleas from North Carolina traders, who in 1718 bypassed their own governor and begged Spotswood to put an end to Blackbeard. It was something else as well. Like his predecessors, Spotswood detested pirates and was determined to prevent their return to the waters of the Chesapeake. There was little doubt in his mind that Teach, gathering a large troop of pirates in Bath, North Carolina, would soon invade the bay. No one would be safe. Spotswood committed the military resources of the colony to carry out a secret preemptive strike to kill the master pirate. Armed with accurate intelligence as to Teach's whereabouts and relative strength and weaknesses, 64 Royal Navy sailors, under command of Lieutenant Robert Maynard, were put aboard 2 fast and shallow-draft sloops to strike a death blow against Blackbeard.
As they left, the people lined the shores and watched the boats depart. They sailed down into Carolina waters and encountered Blackbeard's ships in shallow water. One of the fiercest battles of the day ensued.
Convinced he had the upper hand, Teach ordered his men to board Maynard's ship, only to be confronted with dozens of heavily armed royal sailors who poured up from below decks. The deck became the scene of intense hand-to-hand fighting, with Blackbeard and Maynard, villain and hero, locked in mortal combat. Pistol shots whizzed across the deck, many finding their target. Hollywood could not have written a more compelling script.
Blackbeard was eventually shot numerous times and cut as many. He finally fell dead upon the wooden deck. The English cut his head off and hung it from the bowsprit of one of the ships and sailed back to Virginia and entered the Hampton River. Upon entry, cannons fired, people cheered, and the boat came into dock, and the goods and the captured pirates, his crewmen, were taken off to ships, and the goods were placed in the local storehouse.
13 members of Blackbeard's crew were tried for piracy in Williamsburg and hanged. As for Blackbeard's head, it was said to have been placed on a pole at the mouth of the Hampton River as a warning to those mariners who might consider a life of piracy. The conquest of Blackbeard only increased Governor Spotswood's resolve to end the scourge of piracy in the Chesapeake. He ordered local authorities to be on the lookout for strangers who spent money a little too freely, seizing and trying several men over the next few years for piracy. For pirates, there were 2 forms of capital punishment. There was hanging, followed by a Christian burial for some. But for the most notorious, there was hanging in chains, with bodies left to rot on the gallows. Spotswood always seemed to favor hanging in chains. Before long, Spotswood's reputation extended up and down the Atlantic coast, and he was a hated man among the pirate fraternity. At one point, Captain Bartholomew Roberts, who commanded an imposing flagship with 36 guns, threatened to invade the Chesapeake and take revenge upon Virginia. Fortunately for the Virginians, Roberts was killed in battle before he could make good on his threat. But other pirates nursed their own grudges against the pirate-hating governor and vowed revenge. When Spotswood's term as governor ended, he was expected to return to London to make a formal report to the king. However, he dared not cross the Atlantic on a ship, for if the vessel were to be overtaken by pirates, he feared unspeakable torture at their hands. So Spotswood never returned to England, but lived out his life in America, settling in what is now Spotsylvania County, Virginia, which is named in his honor. By the 1770s, revolutionary fervor swept the colonies, and Virginia and Maryland patriots were in the forefront. In 1776, the growing discord resulted in a formal break with Britain and the declaration of a new nation. Many of these prominent patriots owned plantations on the Chesapeake. Meanwhile, the Royal Navy's role in the Chesapeake changed from chasing pirates to waging war on the Americans. Privateers loyal to the Crown preyed on Patriot shipping in the Chesapeake, in part because they really had no use for the Revolution, and in part because Patriot wealth was there for the taking. Among the first and most ruthless of the Tory pirates was Joseph Wayland, Jr. Whalen eagerly embraced the British cause in 1776, carrying out raids on Eastern Shore communities to gather supplies for British forces. In June 1776, Whalen launched an assault on waterfront settlements in Somerset County, Maryland, carrying off anything of value that could be found. Whalen also took the opportunity as a pirate to settle grudges, and apparently he had a lot of them. If Whalen captured a Patriot planter or merchant, it was usually bad news for the Patriot. While some privateers sailed schooners, Whalen and his men favored smaller barges and whaleboats that could be easily maneuvered in the Central Bay's more shoaly waters. The Eastern Shore and the islands in Tangier Sound harbored strong Loyalist feelings, so Joseph Whalen Jr. never lacked for manpower or Confederates. He and other privateers made life miserable for the Americans throughout the war. In particular, they operated in the Central Bay region, terrorizing plantations and plundering shipping in the Patuxent and Potomac rivers. It wasn't until the signing of the treaty granting American independence that Whalen finally realized he had bet on the wrong horse. With the end of the Revolutionary War, pirating began to taper off in Chesapeake Bay. The last major piracy event occurred in 1807 when the French pirate ship General Messina took the Boston merchant ship Othello anchored in the Patuxent River. By then, pirates were less of a concern for the young American government than the presence in the bay of the Royal Navy, which impressed American sailors into its ranks at will, one of the causes of the disastrous War of 1812. During that war, the Royal Navy would need no help from privateers to wreak havoc on U.S. forces and the American population living near the bay. The day of the Pirates of Chesapeake Bay had come to an end. Today, Chesapeake Bay continues to draw vessels from around the world. Tankers and container ships move up and down the bay filled with cargo, while sailboats that spend the winter in the Caribbean sail in the bay in the spring and summer. Only these boats aren't flying the Jolly Roger from their masts. They come in peace. But just like the pirates of long ago, they come to make repairs to their boats, relax, and enjoy the bounty and treasure that can still be found in Chesapeake Bay.